Hi, my name is Alex, and I'm the Atheist Avenger. This is the first video on my YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to be telling you why I'm an atheist, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about being an autistic atheist because I am on the autistic spectrum. I'm what's called a high-functioning autistic. It's also known as Asperger's, which inhibits some social functions. Uh, but anyhow, I want to go ahead and get to the main topic. This is my first video, so excuse me for being extremely awkward, and maybe I'll get a little bit better with this as time goes along. Alright, so first let me give you my religious background. I grew up in a house that was not religious really at all. Now, you know, my mom would try to contradict that a little bit now with some revisionist history, you could say. When I was growing up, we did not attend church, and we just didn't talk about God and Jesus and all that kind of thing in my home. Now, it was something I was exposed to all the time because, you see, I grew up in the Bible Belt. That's where I live today, right now. And it's the kind of culture where you're surrounded by God and Jesus all the time. I mean, it's in everything. That's, social life in a small town like where I spent the majority of my childhood. It revolves around church and football, high school football. So, so anyhow, yeah. So I grew up in this environment where my household wasn't religious, but I was surrounded by it. My grandparents, my mother's parents, were very religious. They were Pentecostal slash Assembly of God, and uh, it was it was it was full bore religion, like old time religion. At their church they would talk in tongues, and it was a little bit fire and brimstone. So, my main exposure to religion was through my mother's side of the family, and, who most of them were very religious, and just the community going to school, especially the school I went to, because they're very, very religious in that town. It's a small little town, and there's a ton of churches there. I mean, just a plethora of churches, you know. They're more common there than gas stations or anything else. And there's like a lot of youth ministries there. It's a little town that in the area is kind of known for having Christian stuff. So so yeah, and I grew up with my view of religion coming from outside the home, not inside the home, mainly. And so I got a very negative view of organized religion fairly early on, just experiencing some of the ignorance in the town I grew up in East Texas. And I didn't like the way Christians acted. I didn't. Some of the things that put their belief system in a negative light was, first of all, I didn't like how, you know, it would just seem so arbitrary to me that some Christian kid would point out, well, hey, that's a sin, or, it seemed they'd always bring in the religion to put a damper on something or to have something negative to say about something. That seemed to be the context it was brought in. And one of the earliest incidents that happened was that my grandmother, my well-meaning grandmother, she told me that pets don't go to heaven. The dogs and cats and all that don't go to heaven. After my cat had got hit by a car and died, and it really, really upset me. And when I told my dad about it, it's something that at the time I remember it pissed my dad the fuck off. I mean, he was not happy. And that was probably the first time I ever really thought about dying at all or anything like that. It's about 7 years old at the time, I guess, 6, 7 years old. But so that was something early on that gave me negative feeling about religion, you know. But you're immersed in that cultural milieu, I guess is how you pronounce it. And so even if you're not indoctrinated with religion by your parents, which I really wasn't, you just kind of assume, since everyone else talks about this as if it were real, that it is real. So I just kind of had this very shallow, surface level. Okay, yeah, there's God. I mean, everybody talks about God. You know, it just it was something I just sort of accepted, but I didn't delve deep into it. I was a kid, and contrary, to what religious people try to do by filling little kids' heads with death and talk of the afterlife, kids don't give a fuck about that shit. The, they don't want to hear about that. They want to play and be happy. I mean, you're young in life. You haven't been soiled yet by the realities of life. And what do the religious want to do? Well, they want to fill their children's heads with morbid fucking bullshit. You know, when I was a kid, as I said, part of my exposure to religion was through my grandparents and their type of religion. It really disturbed me. It seriously disturbed me when I heard like the blood of the lamb and all these different terms, Holy Ghost. It seemed like something out of a horror movie, to be honest. It seemed like yeah, it seemed like something out of Children of the Crow. He who walks behind the road. So that was another thing, another problem with religion is that there was a little bit of a creepy factor, which I don't think that, a lot of religious people kind of miss that if you were brought up with religion, it seems like. They just see it as normal, but, if you weren't in a household, growing up in a household where that's what you were told regularly and, your mom and dad put it in your head, it was yeah, it was a little psychologically distressing as a child to be exposed to that kind of shit. But for the most part, I went on my little kid way and had my childhood, and I just didn't think about it a lot. Then during adolescence, the time I was entering adolescence, you're becoming more aware of your surroundings, and it's a time in our life when people you start to delve into society, into social. You want to dive into social relationships more. I guess it's the hormones kicking up. You want to make friends. You want to be part of something. It's just part of what you go through in going into adolescence and growing up. So I became more acutely aware of the fact that I wasn't religious, and it became a problem. Because where I grew up, people ask, well, what church do you go to? And if you don't have an answer, it can be extremely, excuse me, it can become extremely awkward. And they want to know why you don't go to church, or if you don't go to a church, they want you to come to their church. And, there's just no good way to deal with this question if you're not religious without ending up coming out of the situation with the person who asked you what church you go to having a worse impression of you than before they asked you, if you see what I'm saying. So it became a situation to where, since I was felt so confronted with religion, I really had to look seriously at the idea of God for the first time. And you're getting to that age around 12 or so where your thought processes are just developing more, and you're thinking more deeply about the world around you than you did when you were younger. So it was natural at that time for me to actually seriously consider the idea. Whereas I just didn't give when you get down to it, I just didn't give a fuck about the idea through my childhood. And initially, my honest assessment, which was free from the bias of having been brought up with it, saying you need to believe this, so I guess it was fairly objective because even though I had negative feelings already about religion, at that time it was more just religion, whereas I didn't really I was neutral about the actual beliefs about God and, well, what happens when you die, and the substance of the beliefs I was neutral on. It was the behavior and the application of religion that I had negative feelings about. So I came to the conclusion that no, it doesn't appear there's a God. I mean, there's no evidence for it, and we've got science to figure out how the universe works, which is based on actually doing things and showing things. You have to show your work, rather than just say, well, you just got to believe. So it just seemed natural to come to the conclusion, okay, well, the religious viewpoint doesn't have any evidence. The scientific viewpoint has evidence. And while, even at that age, I kind of saw that even though the scientific view didn't specifically try to answer, is there a God or not, because it couldn't necessarily answer it, I saw the lack of any evidence found in science for the claim as sort of evidence of absence. And you hear the saying, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but I think that it's safer to assume that it's just safer to assume that it's safer to assume that there's nothing rather than something, especially if that something just raises even more questions, which, you know, a supreme all-intelligent being is going to raise a lot more fucking questions. And even at that age, I got that on kind of a visceral level, I guess. So it was just natural to conclude, okay, there's not no God because there's no evidence of God. Meanwhile, we get a mountain of evidence for all this other shit that explains how our universe works. So, and it doesn't seem to require something else that would be a God. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a space there that a God would fit. And, I also conclude that there's probably not an afterlife. I mean, there's no evidence of that. It seems people die and they die and that's it. I mean, there was no conclusive evidence that they continue on. So, which made sense. I mean, because I didn't remember anything from before I was born, and all we know is this life. So if I didn't remember from anything before I was born, if there was nothing before that, it kind of seemed to make sense that after I died, at the end, it went back to nothing. Which, if that was the kind of revelation at that age, you could feel really detached from it. You didn't get that, oh my God, I'm going to die and I'm going to descend into oblivion. At that age, you could swallow that pill and not even think about it because it was so distant to you. You didn't have any kind of real, or I didn't have any real emotional objection to coming to that realization. Okay. But then, then the problem was personal problems, puberty, hormones, kind of brought me back onto the stupid track, I like to call it, because I went through, I'm not going to tell everything I went through, but I went through a lot of personal problems when I was 13, 14. I know that sounds really trite, like, oh, there was a lot of domestic problems. My parents were divorcing, and a lot of other things that went along with that. And amidst all that, I was dealing with normal teenage shit, with problems with self-confidence and not being accepted, and just being fucking hormonal. So I started to feel for the first time in my life a need for something else, to be part of something. And I also felt really out of control in my life. I won't go into all the details, but my father ended up going to prison, and it was hard to lose him at that time. And because I didn't want to, hold on, yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. So anyway, I didn't want to live with my mother at that time. I wanted to live with my father. And so, I didn't feel in control of my life. I wasn't successful socially. I didn't feel in control that way. So it ended up to where I needed something. And unfortunately, in my loneliness and having access on the internet to all kinds of religious websites, I started to see religion. Now, for social reasons, have participated in a Christian after-school youth program to hang out with people. I had done that like the summer before, and you know, I was fairly familiar with the message of Christianity. But I looked into it more, and I came to the realization pretty quick. I mean, I sort of knew it from the beginning that that wouldn't be the religion for me. Uh, Numerous reasons, original sin, and just several doctrines that just didn't work from the start for me. It seemed self-contradictory, and so as well as familiarity breeds contempt, is the saying, and that was definitely the case with me in Christianity. So I looked into other religions. I looked into Eastern religions. I looked into Buddhism and Taoism and Hinduism. Seriously considered that one for some reason. I think I just thought, excuse me, I think I just thought all the different gods were cool. You know, that makes me sound like a complete moron. But I think on some level that was a part of it with Hinduism. So, yeah, anyhow, then I came to the mistake, which is called Islam. And, I studied Islam. It was something that had been in the news, and I didn't really know or understand anything about it. I only knew what you saw on the television, which, of course, does not give a good impression. But I was willing to hear them out, I think, because that was the time, when Bush was in. I felt really disenfranchised with our government, and I guess my dad going to prison made me resentful on some level toward authority. And so I sort of had this rebellion in me at the time that made me because Islam, because these Muslims were the enemy, they were dangerous. You know, I knew that not all Muslims were. I knew there were Muslims in America. So, I wasn't looking to actually rebel against the government or something, but it just made me, the fact that it wasn't the accepted thing made me willing to look at it and check it out. And I did. And, it offered having most of the same stories from that you knew growing up from the Bible. It even had Jesus, except it seemed to me to resolve some of the problems that I had with Christianity, like original sin. Islam didn't have that. Islam didn't have the Trinity because Islam believed that, Jesus was just a prophet. And I had always admired, Jesus, or at least the way he's portrayed in our popular culture. So I thought, well, that's cool. You get Jesus, but you don't get the stupid, contradictory Trinitarian crap, the blood sacrifice, the morally reprehensible original sin concept. I'm like, well, that's good. And Islam also had, you know, an interesting little story with Muhammad, the illiterate merchant or whatever, you know. And so they painted him to be this good guy, this humble guy that was given this great mission. Of course, later I found out what a scumbag he is. But that was another factor. And then the final thing I'd say that drew me in was the so-called miracles of the Quran. Now, I had always respected science since I was young. I had never been indoctrinated against it by fucking troglodyte, inbred, redneck, idiot parents, like a lot of people are around here. So, I'd always admired science, but like most Americans, especially at that age, I didn't understand a lot of the details. So, it's quite easy at that time, I guess, especially because I was looking for God, but I was a person who had a need, or I thought at the time, for a God who was looking for God. But screw it. Yes, I apologize for my awful appearance. Okay, but yeah, I was a person who had a need for God and was looking for a God, but I did at the same time have sort of a skeptical disposition to where, I needed a little proof. I wasn't someone who could jump in and just take it on faith. And so, and this kind of thing is designed to ensnare people like me. They present these so-called scientific miracles of the Quran, and, they point out passages where, it supposedly talks about the universe expanding and the development of embryos and the fetus and women and all these other things. They say, well, an illiterate 7th century desert Arab wouldn't come up with all this stuff on his own. There's no way he could have known it. No one knew it at this time. It had to have come from divine knowledge. Now, of course, later on I found out that, well, actually, all these so-called scientific miracles, they can be debunked. They really play with language a lot. They even, there have been even cases where, and it's been demonstrated fairly well, that they actually kind of disingenuously translated some stuff from Arabic, which, it's not so obvious, like, oh, they didn't even translate it right, see, they're lying. It wasn't that obvious, but the changes they made were subtle enough to where you could play with the meaning of the passage a little more and make it sound like what they wanted it to sound like, without it being obvious, glaringly obvious, that they were manipulating the text. So that's a lot of it. And so, and I even found out some of the so-called scientific details aren't even in the Quran, aren't even right. You know, so, but yeah, at the time, that's what brought me in for the first time in my life into religion. And from there, you know, I went on a path for a couple of years where I was very religious. I was never a fundamentalist, but I was at one point a strong believer. And over time, I became disillusioned with it because I became disillusioned with Islam for various reasons, and that's like an hour-long video in itself, probably. You know, and in the future, maybe I'll make a video talking more specifically about my problems with Islam. But over time, I became disillusioned with Islam. Not necessarily disillusioned with God quite yet, but I just knew it wasn't for me anymore. So I left religion, and for a short period, I became an atheist again. I guess it was just sort of a recall, like, oh yeah, man, fuck religion, you know. So yeah, I'm an atheist. You know, it was jumping back in the other direction to make up for the direction I'd been heading in. I guess you could say. At the time, you know, I was just overcorrecting rather than coming to an intellectually honest position that had been deeply thought out. So I became an atheist briefly, and then I went back into the sort of murky middle ground. Oh yeah, I'm spiritual. It was a period for several years, really, where I wanted to believe, but I was sort of agnostic about it. I didn't have a specific belief. I didn't know what was out there. I just felt like there was something out there, you know. So, you know, I wasn't part of any organized religion. I My beliefs were syncretic. I believe is the term. You know, sort of a mishmash. I took from different things. They changed on a fairly regular basis. You know, so that was the position I was in for several years. And then around the time my dad died a couple of years ago, I went back to trying to believe in God because just the trauma of dealing with his death. And I briefly tried to go back to Islam. I tried to do the whole progressive. I know this sounds ludicrous, and knowing more about Islam now, when I know about it, you know, it really seems ludicrous. But yeah, I tried to be a progressive-minded Muslim because there is a small movement out there in the West, mainly, of Muslims who, you know, try to, I guess, have a more westernized version of Islam, you could say, sort of a reformed Islam. You know, Christianity used to be even more primitive, more ignorant, more aggressive prior to its reformation. You know, and a lot of Islam's problem is it never had a reformation. And there are some reasons why it may never will. May never will. I guess that's right. Anyhow, but I tried to practice sort of a reformed Islam. And eventually, what happened that finally brought me to a firm atheism, because my atheism was never really firm before, was last year I went to work at a nursing home as a certified nurse aide. And it was an eye-opening experience. You know, I didn't grow up going to nursing homes, so I to visit any relatives or anything. I just didn't have a lot of experience with them. I knew that they were not known to be pleasant places. I knew that. But that's different than actually experiencing it, especially on a regular basis. especially not being a visitor, but someone who actually works there and sees the daily going-ons. And I just came to a sudden realization, really pretty sudden, that my God, how can a all-loving, benevolent God who is, you know, who is all-powerful, how can that God allow people to suffer like this? You know, seeing what people go through for no fault of their own, you know, with aging. They didn't take a drug, a dangerous drug, or share a needle and get some disease, or they you don't even have to smoke, or you can do everything to take care of your body, and yet we're all born with a death sentence. We're all born to age and suffer and die. And it seemed rather pointless. There was no point to it. And that kind of became obvious because, religion tries to tell you that there's some great point to all this, that, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, is what they try to sell you. And there was just this realization inside me, working at a place where you're face to face every day with what is the ultimate fate of living for everyone, regardless of what kind of person they are, whether they're a good person or a shitty person or whatever. Coming face to face with that reality, yeah, there was a firm realization that there's no point to this. There's no good reason for it. And justify and I can't justify myself in coming up with some self-serving bullshit just to keep believing it, because that's what you have to do once you have this realization. You have to come up with some shit like God works in mysterious ways. Like, oh, you know, we're just too underdeveloped. We're too stupid and sinful to figure out why this is good. But this is good. It's all part of a plan. God has a goal in mind, and it's all for a purpose. That's what people have to tell themselves to deal with it. And I'm not getting on a high horse here. I understand the need, but I just wasn't capable of lying to myself at that level. I couldn't do it. If I wanted to do it, I couldn't do it. And I realized that too at the time. I realized there was no going back from this one. I knew inside myself. Because, see, before, when I was an atheist, it was a very sort of surface level, shallow conviction in a way. It was purely kind of intellectual. Like, okay, well, there's no evidence, and therefore, and blah, blah, blah. But there was no firm conviction in it where I realized really inside myself, where I felt it, that, oh, there's nothing else here. This is what it is. There's no one in charge here, or there's no, greater purpose. And when I had that realization, but yeah, I just knew there was no going back. And that was my journey to where I am now of being an atheist. I mean, really being an atheist, capital A. Because I don't reject theism just out of self-interest like a lot of religious people try to say. They like to say that, well, we just want to live our lives how we want, so we say there's no God, so we don't have to follow this God's rules. And really, that has nothing to do with it. I think that the supposed rules that aren't from God, but the rules from religion, yeah, I do think they're bullshit. I think most of them are useless. They're self-contradictory. They're harmful. But that's not really why I'm not a believer. The reason I'm not a believer is I can't believe. I literally can't believe. Maybe some fellow atheists watching this can vouch for me about this. But there's a realization you have inside yourself where it's like, I hate to use what at this point a really hackneyed movie example to use, but I'll use the Matrix. It's a little bit like taking the red pill in the Matrix. You can't untake it. You know, once you have this realization that the existence of suffering renders the idea of an all-loving, all-powerful personal God impossible, like it just doesn't work. Once you have that realization, no matter how much you want to try to bullshit yourself, you can't. I don't know if anyone's humanly capable of bullshitting themselves to that level. That's why you'll hear some born again type Christians and people who used to supposedly be atheists talking about, I'm a recovering atheist or I'm a former atheist or whatever. And I'm not saying they're all liars, but there's there's a difference in atheism between people who are atheists and just sort of reject religion and being religious, but they don't really have a well thought out atheism. There's a difference between them and atheists who are atheists because they really have a strong conviction that they've thought out about why there can't possibly be a God, or at least not a God as we know it, the God we're talking about in this context. You know, and I was really kind of the first sort of atheist. The first two times I was an atheist, and this most recent time, I'm the latter kind. And I think once you kind of get to this point with atheism, I seriously have to question the ability of anyone to go back to any kind of genuine belief. I really do. So that's how I got to be an atheist. And I want to tell you the reason why. Uh, so that's the story of how I came to where I am today in my life, being an atheist. And you may be asking yourself at this point, okay, what does all of this have to do with being on the autistic spectrum? Well, I think my autism plays a little bit of a role in my atheism, and here's why. There have been a couple of different studies performed in the last 2 or 3 years or so on people with Asperger's compared to neurotypicals, um, non-autistic people, on religion and religious beliefs. And it was found that people on the autistic spectrum are a lot more likely to not have religious beliefs or supernatural beliefs. And what they determined in the study is because the people on the autistic spectrum are naturally less inclined toward what's called teleological thinking. What teleological thinking is, it's this type of thinking that humans evolved to have, where we assign agency in our minds. We assign uh, an intelligent cause behind events we observe and experience in our world. Like, for example, if you're an ancient human trying to survive on the plains of Africa, it's a lot safer for you to assume that the rustling in the bushes is a lion rather than just the wind. So that gives you an example of the evolutionary incentive there was to this kind of thinking, to assume there's agency behind random events. Now, eventually, this helps lead to our belief in gods and the supernatural. So, supposedly, people on the autistic spectrum are less prone to this type of thinking. So, that's how I feel that my autism pertains to my atheism. And I also feel like, and the study mentioned this too, that those of us on the autistic spectrum, we're, we're less inclined to be socialized, and what the whole socialization process is as humans we mimic each other, we learn culture, and you get certain ideas that you learn through other humans, through society. And autistic people don't, that process just doesn't take as well. That's not to say that we don't share the same values as other people, but what it does mean is that we're less inclined to just accept things for what they are and as they are, and we're more inclined to want to know, okay, well, why is this true? How does it work? We don't. We're less prone to just accept things based on authority, which can make us really difficult children and students to deal with. But it's a good thing because it does, I think, lend itself to making a person be more prone to think independently rather than just accept something. So anyhow, I know this is my first video and I went way long and I rambled and I probably still say too much. I'm not a professional public speaker at all, and I'm just getting used to making YouTube videos. So bear with me. This may go somewhere good, it may not, but I just had to jump in to the fray here on YouTube, and I just want to share, my viewpoint with others, and I hope somebody gets something from it, just like I get a lot from hearing from the viewpoint of other YouTubers. I think that's really one of the great things about this community is people being able to bounce ideas off of each other and do it in a way that enables us uh, to connect more easily than humans have been able to in the past. I can meet people from across the world who I would have never met before. And with YouTube, it's not just a faceless thing, it's not just text, but you actually get real personal value out of it. You're able to give something a little bit more of yourself here on YouTube than you would on even just like a blog or Twitter. So that's why I enjoy it as a viewer, and that's why hopefully I will be able to enjoy and make some kind of pardon me, make some kind of meaningful contribution as a creator of content. So thank you very much for watching this video if you actually took the time to, and I hope to talk more with everybody out there in the future. Alright, well, I'll see you next time. Same YouTube place, same YouTube channel.